Was sitting on a bench outside the pharmacy when my leg stopped working. That's the only way I can describe it. One moment, I was watching a sparrow hop along the sidewalk, thinking I needed to pick up my blood pressure medication before they closed, and the next moment the world tilted sideways and I was on the ground, cheek pressed against the cold concrete, staring at the wheels of a shopping cart someone had abandoned by the curb. I didn't feel myself fall. That's what scared me most, later, when I had time to think about it. There was no warning, no stumble, no dizziness I could have grabbed a railing against. Just gone. Like someone had reached into my chest and switched something off. When I opened my eyes, there were two faces above me. One was a young woman in a red vest, a pharmacy employee, her name tag catching the afternoon light. The other was a man I didn't recognize, maybe 40, in a dark jacket, kneeling beside me on the sidewalk with his fingers on my wrist. "Sir," he said. "Sir, can you hear me?" I could hear him fine. What I couldn't do was answer right away because my tongue felt like it belonged to someone else. He introduced himself later as a paramedic, off duty, happened to be filling a prescription for his daughter. He said he almost didn't stop. He'd been in a hurry. His daughter's soccer game started in an hour. He still doesn't know why he did. He told me this months later, over coffee at a diner 2 towns over, and he shook his head like he was still puzzling it out. I told him I was glad he had terrible time management. He laughed. Good man. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to back up, because none of what happened outside that pharmacy makes any sense without understanding the 8 months that came before it. My name is Walter Briggs. No, wait. I'm sorry. Old habit. My name is Douglas. Douglas Merritt. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the county, designed drainage systems for half the bridges in our part of Georgia, and I retired 4 years ago with a pension, a house I paid off in full, and what I genuinely believe was a close family. I have one daughter. Her name is Allison. I also have a son-in-law. His name is Craig. I want to be careful how I describe Craig, because I've had a lot of time now to sort through what was real and what I was choosing not to see. He was charming, the way that certain men are charming, the kind of charm that functions more like a tool than a personality. Always said the right thing, always remembered to ask about your knee or your blood pressure, or the project you'd mentioned last month. My late wife, Eleanor, she liked him fine. She never trusted him, but she liked him. There's a difference, and she was smart enough to hold both at once. I wasn't after she passed. Eleanor died 3 years before any of this. Ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. When she was gone, I didn't know how to be in the house anymore. I kept finding her reading glasses in places she'd left them. On the kitchen windowsill, on the back of the toilet tank, tucked into a drawer in the hall. For months I couldn't throw them away. I just kept relocating them, moving them from one surface to another, like I was preserving evidence of something. Allison started coming around more after that. I was grateful. I want to say that plainly. I was genuinely grateful. She brought food, helped me sort through Eleanor's things when I finally felt ready, called every other day just to talk. Craig came too, on weekends mostly. He'd fix things around the house, small repairs I'd been putting off, changed the porch light, replaced a faucet washer. One Saturday he spent 3 hours cleaning the gutters without being asked. I should have asked myself why, but I didn't. I was lonely and I was grieving, and there is nothing more dangerous than a grieving man who wants badly to believe that his family loves him. About a year after Eleanor passed, Allison sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd done homework when she was a girl, where Eleanor and I had drunk our coffee every morning for 27 years, and she told me she was worried about me. "You're alone too much, Dad," she said. She had Eleanor's eyes, Allison did. Same grey-green. I've always found that hard to look at directly. "I'm fine," I said. "You're not sleeping. You're forgetting things." She reached across and put her hand over mine. "We've been talking, Craig and I, and we think it would help if you let Dr. Pearson check in on you more regularly." Dr. Pearson was a physician Allison had found for me the previous year after my regular doctor retired. I'd seen her twice. She seemed competent enough, efficient, businesslike, the kind of doctor who looked at you like a set of data points she was organizing into categories. I hadn't given her much thought. "I see a doctor when I need one," I said. "Dad," Allison squeezed my hand. "Please, just for peace of mind." I agreed. Of course I agreed. She was my daughter. She was worried about me, and the look on her face was the same look she'd had at 8 years old when she'd asked if I would come to her school play. Some expressions don't change when people grow up. They just get more practiced. The appointments with Dr. Pearson started monthly, then became every 3 weeks. Blood draws, reflex tests, cognitive assessments. She told me I was showing early indicators of something she called age-related neurological fatigue, which she explained was common in men my age, especially those who'd experienced significant bereavement. She prescribed supplements, a particular vitamin regimen, nothing alarming, she said, just supporting what my body was losing naturally. The bottles came in the mail. Allison had set up the delivery herself. Around that same time, Allison mentioned that she and Craig had been talking about estate planning. "It's not morbid, Dad," she said when she saw my face. "It's just responsible. Mum would have wanted you to have everything in order." And there it was, the one thing she knew I couldn't argue with. Eleanor would have wanted. I told myself I wasn't bothered by it. I told myself it was practical, sensible, the responsible thing for a man of my age with no spouse. We sat with an attorney, one Craig had found, I realized later, and I signed documents reorganizing the trust. Adding Craig as a secondary administrator, adjusting the power of attorney. I don't remember exactly when I started feeling wrong. It was gradual, the way the worst things are. First it was fatigue, deep, unreasonable fatigue, the kind that sits in your bones and doesn't lift even after a full night's sleep. Then the headaches. Then the tremors in my right hand, faint at first, bad enough eventually that I spilled my morning coffee twice in 1 week. Dr. Pearson adjusted my supplements, told me these were expected fluctuations, told me my body was recalibrating. I asked her once, in October, it must have been October, because the sweet gum trees outside her office window were already turning. I asked her if she was certain there wasn't something else going on, something she was missing. She looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as professional patience, the kind doctors use on patients they've decided are anxious, rather than observant. "Mr. Merritt," she said, "you're 66 years old. You've had a significant loss. Your body is doing exactly what bodies do. What you're experiencing is normal." I believed her. God help me, I believed her. What I didn't know, what I had no way of knowing, was that Allison had been having private conversations with Dr. Pearson that I was never part of. I found out later that she had positioned herself in those conversations as my primary caregiver, my advocate, the person best positioned to interpret my symptoms and make decisions on my behalf. She had been building a picture of me, carefully, over months. A picture of a man who was declining, a man who sometimes got confused, who sometimes lost track of things, a man who needed help managing his own affairs. None of it was true, but it doesn't have to be true. It just has to be documented. The supplements, that's what I keep coming back to. The bottles that came in the mail, set up by Allison, paid for by Craig. I didn't look at the labels carefully. Why would I? They were my supplements. My doctor had prescribed them. My daughter had prescribed them. My daughter had arranged them. I have spent a lot of time since then thinking about how completely I trusted the people I loved. How that trust, which I had spent 67 years believing was a virtue, had been turned into a door that swung open from the inside. The morning it happened, I'd driven myself to the pharmacy to pick up my actual prescription, the blood pressure medication, the one my original physician had put me on years ago, the one Dr. Pearson kept suggesting I might not need for much longer. I remember feeling optimistic about that, imagining coming off one of my medications, thinking maybe things were actually improving. I remember the sparrow. I've already told you about the sparrow. What I haven't told you yet is what happened in the parking lot before I passed out, before the off-duty paramedic found me. I'd been sitting on that bench for about 10 minutes, catching my breath after walking from my car, which I'd parked further away than usual because the close spots were taken. Normal enough. I'd been short of breath more often lately. One of my symptoms, one of the things Dr. E. breath more often lately. Pearson had catalogued and attributed to age. I remember thinking I should call Alison. Tell her I'm not feeling well. And then I remember the next thought that came, the one that surprised me with its clarity. Don't call Alison. I don't know where that came from. Some part of me that had been watching, I suppose. Some part that had been adding things up quietly, off to the side, while the rest of me was too tired and too sad to look directly at the math. Then everything went sideways, and I was on the concrete, and the sparrow was gone. His name was Marcus. No, not Marcus, the paramedic. His name was Tim Sorrells. He was 38, worked out of a station about 12 miles from there, and he had a daughter who played defence on her middle school soccer team, and who, by the time Tim finished with me, had played the entire game without her father in the stands. He called the ambulance himself, rode with me to the ER, gave them his assessment of what he'd observed, the way paramedics do, professional and precise. He also told them something else, something he mentioned almost in passing, the way you mention something you're not entirely sure is relevant, but feels wrong enough to say out loud. He told them about the discoloration on my wrist. I'd worn a fitness band for about a year. Alison had given it to me the previous Christmas. A nice one, the kind that monitors your heart rate and sleep patterns and steps. Craig had helped me set it up on my phone. I wore it every day. I'd stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing a wedding ring after enough years. Tim had removed it when he was checking my pulse. He'd noticed the skin beneath it, a ring of redness, slightly raised, irritated in a way that looked less like a pressure mark and more like a reaction. The ER physician didn't think much of it at first. She treated me for what looked like a cardiac episode, stabilized my blood pressure, ordered the standard workup, but Tim, who had, for reasons neither of us fully understands, simply stayed and waited in the hallway. Tim came back in when the attending physician came out to check on something. "That band," he said quietly. "Is there any chance someone runs a tox screen?" She looked at him. She looked at the band, in a sealed bag now with my other belongings. She ran the tox screen. I was still in the hospital 3 days later when the results came back. I was also, by then, beginning to feel clearer in my head than I had in months. Something I'd assumed was the IV fluids and the rest, but which the doctor was already beginning to suspect was something else. The fitness band contained a substance that should not have been in a fitness band. I won't pretend I understood all of it, the science, the mechanism. What I understood, from the doctor's careful explanation and from the toxicologist they brought in from the university hospital, was this: a compound had been leaching into my skin in small doses, consistently, over an extended period. It was accumulative, the kind of thing that wouldn't show up dramatically, that would instead produce a slow, progressive picture of a man in decline. Fatigue, cognitive slowing, cardiac irregularity, tremors. All the things that had been carefully documented by a physician who was being paid to document them. The police detective who came to see me on day 4 was a woman named Carla Webb. She was methodical, unhurried, the kind of person who asks a question and then waits, genuinely waits, while you find the answer. She sat in the chair beside my hospital bed and she listened to 8 months of my life. All of it, the supplements, the estate planning, the power of attorney, the attorney Craig had recommended, Dr. Pearson. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Merritt, is there anyone currently managing access to your financial accounts?" I told her about the trust restructuring, about Craig as secondary administrator. She wrote something in her notebook. She didn't change her expression, but I saw her pen move a little faster. "I'm going to need the name of that attorney," she said. What followed was not fast, and it was not clean, and I'm not going to pretend that justice is ever as satisfying as people imagine it will be when they're still in the middle of the wrong. Detective Webb's investigation took 4 months. What it uncovered was thorough and in its thoroughness almost incomprehensible to me, not because I hadn't suspected something, but because the full shape of it was so much more deliberate than anything I'd let myself believe about my own daughter. Allison and Craig had begun planning this as far as the investigators could determine, approximately 2 years before the first supplement bottle arrived in my mailbox. There were emails. Craig was not as careful with his personal email as he should have been, which is something Detective Webb mentioned with a particular quality of professional satisfaction. There were text messages. There were records of payments to Dr. Tav Pearson that had nothing to do with my insurance. Dr. Pearson had been promised a sum I will not repeat here, because hearing the number still does something to my chest that I don't fully understand. She had agreed to document a patient's decline according to a narrative that someone else was writing. She had done it. For 2 years, she had done it. The modified fitness band had been the final step. The supplements alone were slowing me, muddying my cognition, creating the paper trail they needed. But Craig apparently had grown impatient. Or perhaps he'd calculated that the timeline was extending longer than they'd planned. The band was meant to accelerate things. A cardiac event that looked natural. A man of my age with documented health problems already under care for neurological fatigue. The money, if I had died when they'd planned, would have passed cleanly through the restructured trust. The house. The pension. The investments Eleanor and I had built together over 30 years of careful, unflashy living. Not a fortune by any standard, but enough. Enough for Craig's debts, which were, it turned out, considerable. I think about Allison, and I find I can only do it in small intervals, not because the anger is too large. It's not anger, mostly. It's something quieter and harder to name. I raised her. I taught her to ride a bike in the parking lot of the Methodist church down the road. I sat up with her through a fever at 2 in the morning when she was 5, telling her the same story over and over until she fell asleep. Eleanor nursed her through pneumonia when she was 12, and I remember sleeping in the chair in her room for 3 nights running because Allison was scared and I couldn't stand to leave. I don't know when a person becomes someone who can do what she did. I don't know if there was a moment, a choice, a turning point, or if it was always there and we never saw it. I don't know that it matters. I know what she chose, I know what Craig chose, and I know what Dr. Pearson chose. All 3 of them were arrested within 48 hours of each other in March of the following year. Allison and Craig were charged with attempted murder, elder financial abuse, and conspiracy. Dr. Pearson was charged with fraud, conspiracy, and a violation of her medical license that I suspect ended her career before any conviction did. The attorney Craig had recommended. He was not directly involved in the physical aspect of what they planned, but he was not clean either, and the Bar Association was informed of certain relevant details. There's a question I've been asked more than once since all of this became known. By neighbours, by old colleagues from the county, by a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 15 years, who somehow found my phone number. The question is always some version of the same thing. How are you doing? And what they mean underneath that question is, how does a person come back from something like this? I'll tell you what I've figured out. Tim Sorrells comes to Sunday dinner at my house about once a month. His daughter, who plays defence, is 12 now, and she can eat more chicken and biscuits than should be physically possible for a person her size. My neighbour, Howard, not related to any of this, just a retired school teacher who lives 2 houses down and has been pestering me to join his woodworking group for 3 years. He finally wore me down last fall. I'm not good at it yet. I made a birdhouse that Howard charitably described as a conversation starter. I'm working on a second one. I went back to my original doctor, who'd retired but had a colleague he trusted. I found a financial advisor with a fiduciary duty, which means by law he has to act in my interest and not his own. I went over every document I'd signed in the previous 3 years with a different attorney when I found myself, and I undid everything that could be undone. The restructured trust is gone. The power of attorney is gone. What was Eleanor's and mine is mine again, protected the way it should have been all along. The house still has the kitchen table where we did homework and drank coffee and where I sat while my daughter told me she was worried about me. I don't know yet what to do about the table. I haven't decided. Some mornings I have my coffee there, and it's just a table, 4 legs and a surface, and 40 years of scratches and rings from cold glasses in summer. Other mornings I sit somewhere else. What I'll tell you, to anyone who's listening and who's maybe sitting with someone in their life right now wondering if the worry is real or whether they're seeing something they don't want to see, trust what you're seeing. Your body knows things before your mind catches up. That thought I had, sitting on the bench before I fell, the one that said, "Don't call Allison," that thought saved my life, even though I hit the concrete anyway. Listen to that voice, the quiet one that's been watching, that's been adding things up off to the side. It knows. Go to your own doctors, read what you sign, and if someone who loves you or who tells you they love you, if they're making decisions faster than you can understand them, slow down, ask questions, call someone you trust who isn't them. Eleanor used to say that hope is not a plan. She meant it practically about finances and home maintenance and making sure the car had an oil change before a long drive. But I think about it differently now. I think hope is fine. Hope is human. But hope is not a substitute for paying attention. Tim's daughter made her soccer team's travel squad this spring. She's going to a tournament in Savannah in April. Tim showed me a video on his phone of her blocking a penalty kick, the way she dropped her shoulder, read the kick, moved before the ball was struck, and I thought, somebody taught her that. Somebody paid attention to how she moved and told her what to do with it. That's the thing I've decided. You pay attention to the people who are real and to the ones who are pretending, to your own body, to the quiet voice. The birdhouse is on the back porch. Howard says if I sand the roof panels again, it might actually keep rain out. I told him I'd get to it this weekend. The sparrows around here have been unusually patient. The thing I keep coming back to is the sparrow. I don't know why my mind goes there first, before the hospital, before Detective Webb, before any of it. But I was watching that bird hop along the sidewalk, completely unbothered, and something in me was still calm enough to notice it. And then I hit the ground, and somewhere between those two moments, the sparrow and the concrete, something in me had already decided not to call Allison. I thought about that a lot. Where that decision came from, I didn't reason my way to it. I wasn't suspicious in any conscious way I could have defended out loud. It was quieter than that. It was the kind of knowing that lives below words, in the part of you that has been watching carefully even when you thought you weren't paying attention. What Craig and Allison built was patient and deliberate. They didn't rush. They constructed a version of me, piece by piece, the documented fatigue, the cognitive slowing, the cardiac irregularities, and they found a physician willing to sign her name to their construction. That takes a particular kind of cold intelligence, and I won't pretend otherwise. But intelligence in the service of something corrupt doesn't stay intelligent for long. Craig kept emails he should have deleted. Dr. Pearson accepted payments that left a trail. Allison underestimated the one thing she couldn't control, a stranger in a pharmacy parking lot who had no reason to stay and stayed anyway. What they built came apart not because the universe corrected it, not because of fate or karma or anything outside the plain mechanics of cause and effect. It came apart because dishonest systems are structurally weak. Every lie requires another lie to hold it up. Every document needs to match another document. When Tim Sorrells noticed the discoloration on my wrist and said something, that one small act of integrity from a man who owed me nothing, the whole thing began to unravel, not dramatically, slowly, the way it was built, but it unraveled. I think about what it took from Tim to say something. He was off duty. He had a daughter's soccer game. He could have handed me off and walked to his car and gone on with his evening and never thought about me again. What he had that Craig and Allison lacked entirely was a conscience that worked even when no one was watching. That's not a small thing. That's actually everything. And I think about what it took for me to survive the aftermath, not just physically but everything else. Going through the documents, sitting with Detective Webb, understanding fully what my daughter had planned for me. There were mornings in the weeks after where getting up felt like something I had to argue myself into. Not because I was broken, but because grief doesn't ask your permission before it arrives. And what I was grieving was complicated and layered and not something I could explain quickly to people who asked how I was doing. What I found in those mornings was that getting up anyway was its own kind of answer. Not heroic, not dramatic, just the decision, repeated, to remain, to rebuild what had been altered, to find Tim for Sunday dinners and Howard for the woodworking group, and a doctor I chose myself, and a trust structure that reflected what Eleanor and I had actually intended. Douglas Merritt is still here. The house is still standing. The birdhouse needs sanding. That's enough to work with.